Welcome into Daily Insider. It is draft day round 2. Lots to break down. So much excitement last night. Before we get into that, clean sweep for me on NBA finals. We have the playoffs. We have the Mavs moving forward. Happy about that. Also, the Suns, not looking forward for the matchup for the Mavs, though. And then, of course, the Sixers taking out Toronto. So, Kevin and I talked about that yesterday. Had to cover that. We have only one team that could potentially go to a game 7 so far. That's Minnesota and Memphis. They play game 6 tonight. But round 2 of playoffs will start later this weekend. But we have NFL draft to break down. Round 1 is over, heading into round 2 and 3 today. To join me to break it down, I have some great draft analysts. Eric Crocker, he hosts Locked On 49ers, Locked On NFL Draft. And then we also have Bryan Perez from the NFL Draft Network. Thank you guys so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, first off, I want to know from your guys' perspective, what was the most surprising thing that happened yesterday? I, for one, think it was the Packers not taking a receiver. Whether or not that was surprising or not, I think it was the wrong choice. But you guys let me know, what was your most shocking moment?
I think probably only one quarterback being gone. Now, again, heading into this whole draft process, people said this was a weak quarterback class, but you saw quarterbacks getting pushed up all the way into some guys into the top 5, second overall to the Detroit Lions. Well, that didn't happen. And that same guy that most guys were thinking would potentially go to Detroit Lions, which was Malik Willis, he didn't even go in the first round. I think that ended up fitting more of what people initially thought about this quarterback class.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett right there in Pittsburgh. But Bryan, what do you think about what was your most surprising moment of the draft?
Honestly, it starts right at the top. And I know there was a lot of noise about Trayvon Walker making this late surge to be the first overall pick. His NFL Combine performance was near historic for a guy with his size and length and just overall, off the bus. He's a guy that wins the off the bus award, right? But the fact that Aiden Hutchinson actually wasn't the first pick, that has actually happened. The Jaguars rolled the dice on hitting a grand slam home run on Trayvon Walker, which could honestly just as easily be a strikeout. To me, it's indicative of a general manager who knows he's kind of like a boxer behind on points on the scorecard, who needs to throw a knockout punch to stick around long. And Trayvon Walker's that one knockout punch type of prospect who, if he hits, he could have a perennial All-Pro. But the chances of a guy who has very little college production suddenly coming into the league and being a double-digit sack artist, that doesn't happen all that often. Now, I know there's going to be the excuse that, hey, look, he played on a defense with a record 5 first-round picks that we saw come off the board yesterday. There's only one guy with the ball to go after, only one quarterback to sack. So it's not his fault necessarily that he didn't rack up the numbers that a guy with his profile should. But still, to me, Aiden Hutchinson, even one of the offensive tackles, would have made a lot more sense than Trayvon Walker right at the top.
Yeah, it was a pretty defensive, powerful first round. 5 of those coming from Georgia. We saw how powerful that defense was in the national championship. But I want to get into wide receivers. I think they kind of stole the show. It was very heavy on edge rushers, but there was so much receiver movement that happened, starting off the top with the trades. I'm curious what you guys think. The Eagles shook things up with the first round in the draft last night when they make the blockbuster trade. They acquire A.J. Brown from Tennessee Titans for the 18th and 101 overall picks. Jalen Hurts obviously was happy about that, but are there ramifications, especially Eric in San Francisco? Does this impact Deebo Samuel at all? I know we all know he wanted to get out of the 49ers, but do you think there's implications there?
Well, I think so. There have been contract disputes between Deebo Samuel and the San Francisco 49ers. And you look at A.J. Brown, they have the same agent. A.J. Brown ended up being traded and got paid $57 million guaranteed. So I think, just seeing that number out there for Deebo Samuel, he should get somewhere around there. But also, I think for Tennessee, a team that traded away A.J. Brown, who was extremely productive for a team, one of the better young receivers in the NFL, and then replace him with what a lot of people think is kind of a clone of A.J. Brown with Treylon Burks, wide receiver out of Arkansas. Big-time talent, needs some refinement in the sense of, kind of route running and things like that. And I know everybody kind of throws route running out there. If you're 6'2", 225 pounds like Treylon Burks, I don't think you're expected to run routes like Stephon Diggs over there in Buffalo. But you still want to be able to be a little crisper and be able to free yourself up a little bit more. Terrific run-after-catch type guy, great at the catch point. But there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to replace the production that A.J. Brown gave them.
What do you think happens with Deebo? Do you think he's staying in San Francisco?
Yeah, I think Deebo stays. They're going to have to figure it out and iron it out somehow, some way. Kyle Shanahan and Deebo Samuel are very close. They communicate all the time. They talk consistently about anything and everything throughout the season. So there might be some disrespect that Deebo Samuel felt from maybe some initial offers, but sounds like maybe they'll be able to mend that fence. They're going to have to, because there's no way you can have an upset Deebo Samuel throughout this year when you have a young quarterback with Trey Lance who's going to try to lead this ship on a team that has Super Bowl aspirations.
Yeah, the Eagles are making lots of moves. Bryan, do you think that they could take over the NFC East?
That might be a little bit of a stretch, right? It all comes down to the quarterback play. And Jalen Hurts, I was a little higher on Jalen coming out of college than maybe the average member of the draft community was. We'll see. I mean, he definitely has no excuses now with A.J. Brown coming on board. And I think what we saw with that A.J. Brown trade and the number of wide receivers who went in the first round yesterday is a direct reflection of what's happening right now in the league. You have NFL front offices who realize, look, we have to get the playmaking wide receiver on the rookie deal for that maybe even that fifth year before having to face the reality of an A.J. Brown or Deebo Samuel situation, which really comes now after 3, maybe 4 seasons. So I'm not surprised we saw 6 wide receivers go in the first round yesterday. I wouldn't be surprised if we see another 3 or 4 come off the board in the first 10 picks of the second round, because the best way to build a receiving core in the modern era of the NFL is not going to be free agency anymore. When these guys are getting paid $25 to $30 million a year, next year they're going to be closer to $30 million a year. So I'm not surprised A.J. Brown got traded, and seeing him get traded is the direct reason why you saw 6 wide receivers go in the first round and why we're going to see another handful early here in the second round.
Yeah, I think the receivers that we're seeing now in the draft, they are NFL ready. They are groomed for day one. I feel like, especially in the first round. Another receiver trade that we saw, Ravens trading Hollywood Brown. Obviously, Lamar Jackson was not happy about that. And we also saw the Packers draft 2 defensive players instead of a wide receiver. So who do you guys think should be more upset, Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers?
Definitely, probably Aaron Rodgers. I mean, this is a team right now where you're heading into the season. I think Alan Lazard, I think that's their best receiver, who he's a legit wide receiver 3. I think in the pinch you could play him as a wide receiver 2, but to have him be your wide receiver 1, maybe most productive guy that you have to be able to lean on, I don't think that's an ideal situation, especially for a guy like Aaron Rodgers. But I don't think it's as simple as just drafting the receiver and plugging them in. 6 receivers were taken before the Packers even picked. So I think at that point, anyone that they maybe would have taken in the first round would have kind of been more of a reach, where there are some terrific prospects that will be going in the second round.
Yeah, and over in the NFC, hey, are the Bears happy about this in Chicago? About
Hey, listen, I was going to say, I was going to jump in and say that the second best thing to having a first-round pick for the Bears was the fact that the Packers did not draft a wide receiver in the first round. And honestly, Aaron Rodgers is miserable this time of year every year anyway, so this is just going to be kind of par for the course. And with Lamar Jackson losing Marquise Brown, I think the ramifications there are going to be more off the field than on the field. It looks like he's got a tight relationship with his wideout, and even though they didn't really build that connection on the field, whether it was due to injuries or just a misfit between style as a passer, style as a receiver, whatever it might have been, it didn't really connect or click the way I think the Ravens thought it would. And look, Brown is another guy who's inching closer to another contract, and he might make a lot of money out in Arizona, hooking up with Kyler Murray, who he has a pre-existing connection with. So I think Lamar Jackson is going to be more like, his guy off the field is gone. Whereas Aaron Rodgers, I mean, once again, he's starting a season with, like Eric said, just Alan Lazard as wide receiver, going from Davante Adams to Alan Lazard and no first-round prospect. I mean, they had 2 picks. Yeah, sure, 6 guys were taken before their first pick, but they could have packaged those 2 picks up like the Saints did to move up to get Olave. Teams got aggressive to get their guys, and they chose not to. So we'll see as the world turns with Aaron Rodgers, right?
Do you think that was a message to him? I mean, it's time after time. I don't
know. I think at the end of the day, you got 2 very stubborn personalities with Aaron Rodgers and the Packers general manager. They're both set in their ways. They're both going to be opinionated. And I don't think either one is going to make the other happy. This is strictly a business relationship at this point. Rodgers is playing another year. He's going to try to win a Super Bowl. And the Packers are doing what they think is in the best interest of their team. Adding a starting linebacker and a starting defensive lineman is not a bad way to build a defense and a football team. So you can't draft in the first round just to make a diva quarterback happy. But this is Aaron Rodgers, right? He's a little bit of an exception. So, like I said, Bears fans are celebrating like they got the best first-round pick out of yesterday's draft.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw this, though. The Rams didn't have a first-round pick, but McVay was still vocal when the Patriots selected out of Chattanooga Cole Strange. They said, hey, we could have seen him at the 104th pick, but he was selected first round by the Patriots. Obviously, we've seen Belichick make great decisions. What do you guys make of that pick?
Well, you talk about Belichick making great decisions, but drafting hasn't been a strong suit of the New England Patriots outside of maybe drafting the best player in NFL history and Tom Brady, and they kind of lucked up on that in the 6th round. So, seeing Cole Strange go where he did, I think it's questionable, and I think everybody's kind of right to question that. The value of Cole Strange was more late day 2, so everybody expected him to go at some point today, but even later. You talked about what Sean McVay said. Pick 105 or 103 in that range. Tennessee Chattanooga, I mean, terrific prospect. And maybe they were just like, look, we don't care about who he played against. We don't care about the school he came from. We like what we seen on film. We like what we saw at the Senior Bowl. And we're just going to ride that out and pick him in the first round. But a lot of people are very confused by that pick.
What do you make of it, Bryan?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I mean, honestly, we thought the 2022 draft, the first round was going to be crazy, wild surprises, unpredictable moves. And for the most part, a lot of the guys that were projected to be first-round picks were first-round picks. It's just certain teams traded up or maybe more aggressive to get someone than was projected. Cole Strange was the only really strange selection in the first round. And it's kind of one of you get that feeling sometimes that front offices might get that smartest guy in the room, mentality. This is the Patriot way. We know what we're doing, and perhaps it'll work. And they have another top tier interior offensive lineman who's going to play 12 years and be an all-pro, but the odds are certainly stacked against that. 50% of first-rounders hit anyway when you stack a guy who's a smaller school prospect who hasn't faced the type of competition that he's going to face day one training camp, let alone the regular season. It's a questionable selection. And Eric's right. He was a late day 2 prospect who only elevated into that range after having a good pre-draft process. He worked his way up there. The fact that he's a top 32 pick is pretty surprising.
Yeah, you could have gotten him as a steal later on. That's, I think, the most surprising part about is who made the selection. That's the one that shocked me the most.
Who would have guessed before first round that he would go before Nakobe Dean or a prospect of that type of caliber?
Exactly.
I know. And I got to believe that Belichick's got something up his sleeve, but who knows? But Eric, you mentioned this. This was another shocker for you, is that only one quarterback selected in the first round. You still have, Kenny Pickett was the selection for the Steelers. I think it's because they had that connection with him there. But to your point, Malik Willis is still available. You have Sam Howell, Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder, plenty options, but it's not the quarterback class that we saw last year with 5 first-round picks that were quarterbacks. This year it looks a lot different. But there is still one quarterback out there, Baker Mayfield. Do you think that someone is going to pick him up, maybe the Panthers, or are they looking to make a second-round quarterback pick?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big question of today, to see where some of these guys get moved or if they get moved at all. Baker Mayfield, I mean, it's clear that Carolina is kind of the team that most people think if they're going to make a move for a quarterback, it's going to be them. It could be Baker Mayfield. It could be Jimmy Garoppolo. That's going to be probably one of the key things to watch for day 2.
So you think that Garoppolo might be leaving the 49ers?
Well, a lot of him still being on the 49ers had to do with his shoulder injury. There were trade talks with multiple teams prior to it coming out that, hey, this guy's going to need surgery. Then all of a sudden the talk stopped. If people have checked out, maybe there's some update on his shoulder, things look a little bit better. You look at what he's able to do, which is at the very least be a very good leader in a locker room. He's been a part of a winning culture. He can play at a level to where he's a pretty good ball distributor and play with timing and rhythm. I know, he is not the sexy guy on the field where he's throwing the ball downfield or running for first down or making all these off-script plays, but I think he brings a certain element of, exactly what you're getting that some teams are going to value more than a lot of fans do.
I just wonder if the best team he can be with is in Shanahan's offense, but who do you think is more likely to be traded, Baker Mayfield or Jimmy G?
I would probably say Baker just because he's the healthier version of the two, but he's also the wild card with his personality and how that's going to mesh with guys. And I think he came out with the Carolina Panthers with Robbie Anderson when they were like, oh, the Panthers are the leaders to get Baker Mayfield. And he was on Instagram saying, no, don't do it, right? You don't hear things like that come out about Jimmy Garoppolo. A lot of people really like him, respect him. His teammates haven't said one bad thing about him. And the situation where he's at right now is not a lack of a guy that just can't play the quarterback position. It's, okay, maybe it's not high-end quarterback play, but also they drafted a guy number 3 overall. So at some point, the writing was on the wall. Jimmy was going to have to be moved, but I think definitely a different situation than what's going on over there in Cleveland.
And hey, they've been winning playoff games and Aaron Rodgers hasn't been. So there's that too. What do you make of it, Brian? Do you think that there's any chance that either of these quarterbacks will be traded?
Baker's a tough one, right? Because there's so much that you're taking out with Baker Mayfield, specifically the personality. You know, he's the former number 1 pick overall in college. He made some questionable decisions, just the way he would celebrate the one game where he planted the flag.
That was at Ohio State.
Yeah, he's never really changed. You know, the zebra doesn't change their stripes, right? He's still that guy. And I think when you see the Browns make the kind of extremely strong, you know, to put it lightly, move to grab Deshaun Watson, there's no stronger way to tell the league that Baker Mayfield's just not the guy than what they did with Deshaun Watson. And I don't think Baker Mayfield's scouting report for the 31 other teams that didn't draft him a few years ago was nearly as high as what the Browns front office had on him. And I think that's why the interest in him might just not be that high. We look at this as, oh, wow, the former number 1 overall pick, a guy who has some moxie. He's made some plays in the league. Teams are going to line up for him. How do we know every other team in the league didn't have him as a 2nd or 3rd round guy? We don't know that. He was kind of a shocking and surprising late rise into that 1st overall pick. He didn't start out his final college season as a player with that kind of grade. He just ended up there, right? So he might not have as much respect across the league as we think. And I agree with Eric. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is no brainer. I would take him over Baker Mayfield. Look at the Carolina Panthers. Jimmy Garoppolo is a full tier better than Sam Darnold or anything else that they have, simply because, like Eric said, he's good enough. We've seen it on tape where he's good enough to lead an offense. He might not win games for you. Maybe at times he's a little suspect, but he's not going to lose games either. And he's played a long time, has a lot of starts, has good pedigree. Jimmy G is definitely the guy that if a team's looking to make that half step up, not go all in on a rookie quarterback, excuse me, Jimmy Garoppolo would be no doubt the first choice.
Yeah, and what we've been seeing is that teams are more inclined to spend money and get a quarterback that's ready to go, has the experience, than developing one from the draft. So what do you think is the bigger trade-off? Is spending for an experienced quarterback, even if it is a Baker Mayfield, or going and drafting them?
I think at this point,
draft like this, because this isn't a strong quarterback class, or wait a year and get a CJ Stroud.
I think it depends on the team. When you look at Carolina Panthers and where they're at with Matt Rule, this is year 3, and they want to see something. And they're going to want to see some improvement, and they're going to want to see some of the money that they've been doing paying off. And if he doesn't win this year, he's probably out of there. All right, he's not even going to have the opportunity to see one of these younger guys develop if they do indeed draft a quarterback in the 2nd round or at some point day 2. So I think for him to kind of save his job, he would probably want to lean on a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo who can come in right away. And yeah, you got to pay a little money. His contract isn't too crazy. Maybe the 49ers can eat some of Jimmy Garoppolo's salary, maybe take $10 million off there. So, okay, you have Sam Darnold, who you picked up his 5th-year option, and you have Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe you pay them each about $18 million a year, which would be $36 million total, which is still less than guys like, I don't know, most of these top tier quarterbacks or guys like even Kirk Cousins, and you're still getting good value. So I would probably go that way. Still don't have to give up a ton of draft capital for Jimmy Garoppolo. I think a 4th round pick would do it, maybe even a 5th or a 4th in the next year, 4th, something in that range there. So I would go more that range to where at least I know, hey, man, if I make the playoffs, that's probably going to save my job as opposed to drafting one of these rookies and having to play with Sam Darnold.
Yeah, especially in a class like this. See, in Chicago, it's a different story. They draft the good quarterback, don't build around him. So which way do you make of that? Would you rather go for the experienced quarterback? Or, I mean, you guys got a great pick in Justin Fields. It's just to give him something out there, please.
I think it depends where you're at in the trajectory of the franchise, right? What Eric was talking about with Matt Rule, and he came in like one of these, a bunch. We've seen it before. The brilliant college coach who's going to come in and revolutionize a pro culture, offense, system. and he hasn't been able to do it. And I don't even know if the quarterback will necessarily change that. He just might not be a great head coach, right?
Yeah.
If I were the Panthers, I might have given Kenny Pickett long and hard consideration for self-preservation purposes, because Pickett is probably the closest rookie in this year's draft who could have come in and played at a level comparable to potentially Jimmy Garoppolo, right? And if you have a rookie putting up numbers like that, you might get that second and third year to work with him because the future looks much brighter than a veteran in Jimmy Garoppolo who puts up that same type of season. And it's kind of like, here we are in quarterback purgatory. There's nowhere to go but down and rebuild the whole thing. So Pickett might have been kind of that life jacket for them if they went in that direction. I don't see it being Malik Willis in the second round. And, speaking about Malik Willis for a second, I feel really bad for this guy because I think his draft narrative took on a life of its own because the draft media overworked, overhyped, trying to get that quarterback to be a top 10 prospect. And Malik Willis, who certainly looks the part, has a cannon of an arm, best athlete at the position in this year's class. But is he ready to be the kind of player in the pocket that the NFL traditionally drafts that high? Probably not. He was a late first, early second round guy for most of the year. And then we saw this late surge top 10, and he was, he wasn't going to get out of that murderer's row of quarterback needy teams in the top 10. And now he looks like a guy who's fallen out of the first round. Well, has he really? Or is this just what his scouting report should have been all along? A team grabs him here on day 2. Now you're getting a great quarterback prospect in the building who's not going to have to play right away, who can sit 1 or even 2 years, develop his game. And when Malik Willis is ready, Malik Willis is going to do some damage in the NFL. But if he was a first-round pick, the pressure would have been extremely high, and he would have been rushed on the field. And we've seen how quarterbacks wash out of the league, not because of a lack of talent, but because of the situation they're placed in. So the best thing that's happened to Malik Willis is the fact that he wasn't drafted yesterday. Yes, it's not the best thing for his bank account. It's not the best thing for his pride. But the goal for these guys should be, let me get to a second and third contract and really cash in. Malik Willis's opportunity to potentially do that, I think, went way up by falling into the second round.
Yeah, that's a good point. More often than not, we see these top quarterbacks go to the teams that get the top picks, and those programs aren't in the best position. So maybe it will work in his favor. But I want to get to Chicago, who now gets to enter the conversation with the second round. Please, let's get some Justin Fields some weapons here. And I'm looking at a mock draft that you retweeted with George Pickens out of Georgia being the 39th pick for the Bears. I've been hearing some red flags out of him. Maybe it's he's a nuisance or something like that. But how high is the ceiling? Do you think that the Bears could have a strong fit with him? And hey, Justin Fields played in Georgia,
right?
So maybe they can have that connection too.
Of all the wide receivers who are on the board right now, and Eric, you can let me know if you agree or disagree. George Pickens, to me, profiles as the only guy left on the board who can be the true alpha wide receiver 1 in the NFL. There's a lot of very good receivers still on the board, complementary pieces, even potential wide receiver 1s down the road. But in terms of the true alpha who can win in any situation, on any level, on any route, I think George Pickens is the only guy left who can do that. And honestly, if George Pickens didn't tear his ACL last spring, he would have been a top 20 pick in this class. I am convinced of that. The fact that he's coming off the injury, plus whatever these character issues are that tend to bubble up at this point in the draft process, I can't confirm it. I can't deny it. So I don't necessarily let it affect my evaluation of a player. At this point in the second round, you're getting a second round rookie contract for a guy who could easily emerge as a starter opposite Darnell Mooney and become Justin Fields' bailout guy in year 1 of his career. That's a no-brainer. I think Pickens is definitely the favorite in the clubhouse if I was drafting. But you still got a guy like Christian Watson who's there, Alec Pierce who's there, more big-bodied speed guys who can get downfield. The Bears should get this right. It's going to be really hard to screw this up. They haven't focused on giving Justin Fields weapons this offseason. I get you build football teams from the inside out. Maybe they don't feel like they're ready yet for the wide receiver to be that spot they target. They didn't do it in big money in free agency. Get the cheap rookie in the second round. Bears fans might riot if they don't do it. So we'll see. Buckle your chin strap.
I like that, Brian. I like that you brought up Alec Pierce, because to me, when you talk about like not having a lot of question marks with him, and not just off the field, he's clean there, but on the field, I think Alec Pierce has the least amount of question marks about who he is and what he brings to the table. We're talking about a guy who can play outside and be able to beat defensive backs vertically with strong hands and speed. A guy that can win inside and intermediate routes. All right, he could play in the slot. He's tough. He knows how to settle in zones. If you want that safety blanket for a guy like Justin Fields, where it's like, look, we can find a bunch of different ways to get you the ball. And by the way, very athletic, had the highest vertical jump at the NFL Combine, ran a 4.41 official. His unofficial was 4.33. So he's a guy who definitely can run and has the speed to threaten all areas of the field. I think Alec Pierce is probably one of the receivers that's getting a little bit overlooked in this class, but has really high potential to be that wide receiver one on an NFL team. And you look at guys that are similar to him, and not just because they're white guys, but like Jordy Nelson, kind of that big vertical threat on the outside, being able to win vertically down the field. I think Alec Pierce has a lot of that type of game to him. So if you're talking about Justin Fields and doing what's best for him to really help him with a very reliable prospect, a guy that's going to be on the field and do everything that he's asked to do, no questions about it, I think Alec Pierce is really that guy.
It is interesting, though, that maybe the injury came into play because Jalen Waddle was hurt. We saw him try to get into the national championship, played like one play, and then he went out. But he proved his worth beforehand. He was the Heisman favorite before. Then Devontae Smith comes in, wins the Heisman, goes off for Alabama. But Jalen Waddle still gets drafted higher than him. So that's where I wonder where is the change here for him this time around. So why do you think that maybe this injury is the reason he's falling, or do you think it's the character thing? Like where did we see him fall into the second round here?
I think part of it too is what we just don't know. George Pickens,
Yeah.
although he had a solid breakout year as a freshman, since then, he had the injury, had to come back from that. You watch him on film last year. I mean, there's not these super productive receivers at Georgia. Their offense wasn't very friendly to the guys that are trying to get drafted to come out now. We saw Jermaine Burton transfer out of Georgia and say, get me out of here. I'm going to Alabama where I'm going to be able to showcase my ability a little bit more so people don't have the questions about me like they do with George Pickens. I host Locked On 49ers and Locked On NFL Draft, but my co-host on Locked On 49ers brought up a very interesting stat with George Pickens. He ran 70% of his routes were either a go route or a stop route. It was 35 and 35 each. So when we talk about limited route tree, there was definitely that. So now you have a limited route tree. You have, if there are questions off the field, I haven't heard, but I don't know. But if there are those questions, the injury history, not knowing exactly what you're getting from him, I think there's so many questions surrounding him, even more so than just an injury and having to recover from that. The production wasn't quite there consistently throughout his tenure in college football. I like his upside. I like his ability, but still a few too many question marks for me.
Bryan, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how you broke that down, Eric, because the Bears back in 2015, different regime, different general manager. It was the Ryan Pace's first draft, actually. They spent a top 10 pick on Kevin White from West Virginia, who had that same limited route tree concern coming out as a prospect. And even though he kind of was derailed early in his career with injuries, when he came back and was as healthy as he was going to be, you could tell that his limited route running ability was going to create a problem for him moving forward. And he washed out of the league pretty quickly. When it comes though to with Pickens, I think when you get into this second round range, the day 2 range, at least my draft philosophy is upside becomes even more appealing, right? The first round pick has to become a starter. They have to be a guy who has a really good blend of, I've seen it on tape, he's done it in shorts and a t-shirt at the combine, and the upside still exists. He's not a player who's maxed out at his ceiling already, but we already know his floor is pretty high. He's going to be a starter. You take guys like that in the first round, in the second and third round, and even trickling into day 3, upside really, really matters. So if George Pickens fits the profile of a wide receiver who you view as, this guy has a chance to be the best wide receiver on the board who's left here in day 2, and maybe even outperform guys who were drafted yesterday, you take a swing on him. Now, the player who might fit that definition the best is Christian Watson, who, I spoke to some guys who do some work for the Senior Bowl, and the name Randy Moss was thrown around when describing him from guys who have done this a lot longer than me and are a lot more in the know than I am. That's a slippery slope for me. Hall of Famers, I will never comp a prospect to one of the best that ever did it.
Mhm.
But when that name gets thrown around about a player's athletic upside and profile as a receiver, you got to pay attention to that. Now, you think that would be a first-round pick. He wasn't a first-round pick. But Watson, Pierce, look, Pierce has a high school volleyball background. That guy can jump out of the gym. So he's a player, like you said, Eric. The point here, right? I mean, the beauty with the 2022 NFL draft for teams like the Bears that didn't have a first-round pick, and even, God forbid, the Packers, you're going to get a good wide receiver in the second round. You're going to get a guy who's going to play right away. And it's kind of like when you go to the ice cream shop, pick your flavor. You know, some people might prefer the upside of George Pickens. Some people might prefer the I've seen it with Alec Pierce. It's going to be interesting to see how these guys get stacked coming off the board in the first 10 or 15 picks.
And this may not be surprising, but for the first time since 2014, a running back was not selected in the first round. We still have Kenneth Walker the third, and we have Breece Hall available. Looking at running backs nowadays, they're people don't see the value because that second contract that comes around after the rookie contract could be too big. That then they don't last as long in the NFL, but hey, we've seen how Najee Harris did. We saw how the Colts did with Jonathan Taylor. So what do you guys make of the running backs available and what teams could choose him?
I thought Breece Hall was the one guy that could potentially go with that, connection to Buffalo Bills. But outside of that, I didn't foresee a running back going in the first round. I think if you try to kind of project where a guy might go in the second round, you have Seattle Seahawks that have multiple picks in the second round early on, pick 40 and pick 41. So they potentially can be in the market for a running back. I could definitely see that. Houston Texans, we talk about all these different things that they need. I like how they address certain things early in the first round. But now, who's your running back? Rex Burkhead? I don't think that's as ideal of a situation. So if you want a dynamic running back who can do it all, again, you have a guy like Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall as well there. So I think we can definitely see running backs kind of start to fly off the board a little bit early second round, or at least the top two guys, and maybe you could throw Spiller into that as well.
Yeah, Ron, what do you make of it? Running
Yeah,
backs, do you see the value in a first round pick there?
I mean, I'm old school. I love when a running back comes off the board in the first round, but right now you got to be an elite player at the position, just like across the board, rare guy to be even a top 32 pick at the position right now. And Najee Harris, I think maybe if the Steelers had to do that all over again, would they take him where they did? There's no doubt he's a game changer, culture changer at running back. But here we are, they're entering year one with a rookie quarterback. By the time they're ready to compete, Najee Harris is going to have a lot of tread off his tires, probably entering that dreaded second contract negotiation. And is he going to stick around long enough to be the difference maker on a Super Bowl run? So that's the risk you run. If you're going to draft a first round running back, it better be because it's the missing piece, the final piece to the puzzle to get your offense to that elite level and then push you over the top. The Chiefs tried to do that with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, I think that was coming off actually their Super Bowl win or before, whatever it was. That didn't work out, right? But this is the sweet spot for running backs, the second and third round. I mean, Nick Chubb was a second-round pick. Derrick Henry was a second-round pick. You can go down the list of guys who are the best.
Dalvin Cook.
Yeah. I mean, the best running backs in the league come out of this round. So I think NFL teams kind of know that too. They're going to get players like Breece Hall. Breece Hall is a day one starter in the NFL next year. Kenneth Walker is a day one starter in the NFL next year, depending obviously on the depth chart they go to. But these guys can play. They're going to play right away. Now, Javonte Williams last year is a perfect example. He was a second-round pick. And even though the Broncos re-signed Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams is going to become one of the best running backs in the NFL sooner than later. So this is the round that they're going to go. And usually that's around like picks 45 to 50, maybe a little earlier. Maybe a team trades up to pick 38, 39 where the Bears are to grab them. But they're going to come off the board, and fantasy football managers are going to be really excited about it.
Yeah, 24 overall, Najee Harris to Steelers. That does seem high for a running back, but even J.K. Dobbins, we didn't get to see much of him because he got hurt last year. Another great second-round pick, but I think it is smart to wait just because they could be available. It's not as deep this year, but there are some big names like Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall that are X factors. So I see the value in doing that. But I wanted to get to the 49ers. They have the 61st pick today. Most mock drafts, we don't know who they're going to take, what they're leaning towards, but a lot of mock drafts have them selecting a defensive back, maybe an edge. So what do you think that the 49ers will do tonight?
I think safety is definitely a big need of the 49ers. You see guys out there like Nick Cross or, even guys like Jalen Petrie, Jaquan Brisker. We'll see which one of those guys are available at pick 61 and however grade they have on them. There are some impactful guys there that they may want to trade up for. A guy like David Ajabo, who I know he's coming off of an injury that he suffered during his pro day, but big time Billy, I think if it weren't for this issue, this would be a guy that's a top 15 pick. So I think that would be great value there. They could go receiver. I mean, there are just so many different ways the 49ers can go with this. Receiver is kind of a need. Right now, you have Deebo Samuel and going through the issues with him. You also have Brandon Ayuk, who you spent a first-round pick on recently. But outside of that, there's not much. Juwan Jennings, he was a seventh-round pick, and he is okay, but you would like to get somebody that maybe brings a little bit more and is a little bit more dynamic. There's guys like Sky Moore out there. We talked about Christian Watson, who can potentially be there. So maybe they go in the interior on the defense, on the offensive line, and that's another area that the 49ers can address, but definitely it could be more of a best player available situation for them.
Yeah, looking at some of the guys that we've already mentioned, we talked about Pickens, you just mentioned Sky Moore, we talked about Watson. There's receivers that teams definitely need, like the Bears, like the Packers. Those are still going to be available, but looking around, I mean, the quarterbacks are available. We mentioned them. Who are your guys' best available players that are still left up on the board?
Well, I mean, I talked about Nakobe Dean, and
go ahead.
That's a guy who has top 15 type ability on the field. Now, he didn't test. There's some, injury concerns and whatnot. His size, he's not the biggest of guys, but he flies around, whether it's sideline to sideline, moving forward. He has some coverage ability, but I think teams might be a little bit worried about it. I was surprised that Quay Walker went before Nakobe Dean. So I'd say he definitely has to be probably my best available prospect still left. Outside of him, again, there are some guys that could definitely help you in all areas of the field. We talked about some of the receivers and quarterbacks that are still available, but I think Nick Benito, edge rusher, that's a guy. Jalen Petrie, for sure. Travis Jones, he's one of my favorite guys, the defensive tackle out of Kentucky. Big guy, but he played at kind of a, non-power 5 school, but has the ability to really rush the pass from inside with power, with quickness. I saw him dominate at the Senior Bowl throughout that entire week. So there are definitely plenty of very good prospects still available.
Yeah, just looking at my list, ripping down some names that Eric already mentioned. You got Nakobe Dean, David Ajabo, Boye Mafe is going to come in as a day one contributing member of a pass rushing rotation, if not start. Roger McCreary, he can come in and start at cornerback day one in the NFL. Logan Hall, defensive lineman from Houston, moving him up and down the defensive line, versatile, big-bodied guy. He actually is a guy to keep an eye on for the Chicago Bears. I don't know how Perion Winfrey wasn't selected in the first round. This is an interior defensive lineman who is a game record. Now at the Senior Bowl, you didn't have to see him dominate. You can actually hear him dominate with how strong he was at it with his reps. Andrew Booth, cornerback from Clemson, another guy. I think there might be some injury issues there, but he's another one that should come off the board early today. Jump to the offensive side of the ball. We talked about Malik Willis, Breece Hall, Christian Watson, Sky Moore. Eric, you mentioned him. Love Sky Moore's skill set. Reminds me so much of a name from the past, Golden Tate. I think he's going to be a playmaker just like him in the league. Kenneth Walker, George Pickens. List goes on and on. I mean, we can name 20 guys, 25 guys that a month or two ago, some of them were in first-round mock drafts. So we've heard all about the depth of the 2022 NFL draft, and we're seeing it come to fruition now. All this talent falling into the second round.
Mm-hmm. So looking at some of the winners and losers, like the teams that were at the top that didn't have great seasons, Lions, they had a great draft first round. Giants, Jets, they made some good moves. But Bryan, you mentioned the Jags missed out on Aiden Hutchinson. Looking at the winners and losers, would you put the Jags in there just based off of the selection that they might have missed on?
Yeah, the Jaguars, to me, look, you overthink the process sometimes, right? And Trayvon Walker is going to probably, because I'm saying this, he'll probably be a 10-year-old pro, and I look like a moron. But this is the draft process, and that's what we do. I just think that they made a mistake. I think Trayvon Walker will be a good player in the NFL, but not a player who justifies being that number one overall pick. And I feel bad for him, because that's the kind of thing that you're going to carry with you through your career, as he can be a very good NFL starter, and it still won't be good enough because of his status as the number one pick. One of the teams I thought you mentioned the Giants as a winner. I mean, they came away with KT and Evan Neal at the 4th and 7th picks. These two guys at various points in the draft process were number one pick overall candidates, and they came away with both of them. Both of those guys were over-scouted during the process. Both of these guys have been blue chip players, 5-star guys since high school, #1 overall pick candidates in college. They are as close to a sure thing as being high-level starters in the pros as you can get, and both of them go to New York. That's huge. Baltimore Ravens, I thought, won yesterday as well, landing Kyle Hamilton, who was arguably the best player in the draft, regardless of position, at number 14, and then circling back and getting Lamar Jackson, an all-pro caliber talent at center, and Tyler Linderbaum. So, and unfortunately for the Bears, I also like what the Detroit Lions did, but we'll leave that short and sweet.
Well, before we get there, before you go into yours, though, I on my podcast with Morton Anderson, he made a case for the Lions going to the playoffs, and I said, okay, they got a lot of draft picks. We got to see how they do. Do either of you guys actually think the Lions can get into the playoffs now? I mean, they have a weaker schedule that could help to their favor. They just did a great first round, but are they now a playoff team?
They have to continue to revamp that defense, right, and get better there. And if they do that, Jared Goff, I have a lot of experience watching Jared Goff over in the NFC West being the quarterback for the LA Rams. And although he wasn't like this great quarterback, he was solid. He won a ton of games. So if you can build around him just enough, he can help you win games and lead, at the very least, lead you to the playoffs, especially when you have 7 spots there. Now, do any of us predict that? I would say no. But I wouldn't quite rule it out. And I like what they did. That was the team I wanted to highlight. I mean, obviously getting Aiden Hutchinson, him going number 2 overall, being able to stay in the state of Michigan, that's awesome. And then being able to move all the way up from pick 32 to pick 12 and draft a receiver like Jameson Williams, who I love. He was my wide receiver 1 in this class. I think he was one of the most explosive receivers here. I think he's a terrific route runner that gets overshadowed because of his vertical speed. But we're talking about someone who, when he steps on the field, which I don't foresee him missing a lot of time, he's going to be an impact player. And then if you look at them, they didn't really lose much. They still had the 46th pick overall in the second round. So they will be picking very soon in the second round and be able to add to what they're doing here. So I like a lot of what we've seen from the Detroit Lions.
Just to jump in real quick, the craziest thing with that Lions trade is that the Vikings are the team that traded with them. I mean, the Lions literally, Eric, that to me, that trade compensation, that trade package, it almost feels like one of these Madden simulated trades that you can pull off. And it's just so unfair, but you beat the bot. And it's the Vikings, an interdivision team, that let this happen. The Vikings handed them Jameson Williams, which to me is going to come back to haunt not only the Bears and Packers, but the Vikings twice a year for a long time.
Yeah, he was recruited by Ohio State. He ended up leaving just because Brian Hartline can recruit wide receivers. So we definitely believed in that kid before he even was a transfer. But looking at some of the losers you guys picked, how can they redeem themselves today? Is there a way that the Packers can salvage the picks that they made? Obviously, great defensive players, but hey, you got needs to fill as well. Maybe the Jaguars stepping in here, Bears making a good pick. Where do you guys think that some of these teams can step up in day 2?
I know Brian talked about the Bears being a winner because the Green Bay didn't pick a receiver, but I still think they're kind of been losers of the off seasons, not doing enough around your talented young quarterback. Like, you have one guy, I think, that he can really confidently throw the ball to, and Darnell Mooney, and then that's it. So I think if you want to talk about redeeming yourself, they're going to have to not only redeem not having a first round pick, because I'm assuming they used that to get Justin Fields, but getting him some weapons. And I don't even care if they use both of these second round picks on receivers, or one receiver, a tight end, whatever they have to do to get their young quarterback weapons. Do that. If they do that, they'll redeem themselves and they'll be a winner.
Look, you're preaching to the choir here. Two picks in the 39 and 48. They use both of them on wide receivers, and Bears fans will be very, very happy. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be a dream scenario. And looking back at the Packers are in the exact same situation as the Bears. I mean, they can fix this narrative of another 20 straight years with no wide receivers in the first round. They can fix that narrative with a player who has a first round pedigree narrative that's circled around him during their pre-draft process. You land him in the second round, and the story about the Packers is going to flip just as quickly as it was, oh my God, they didn't take a receiver for Aaron Rodgers in round 1. Now it can be, what a genius strategy that the GM pulled off to land this receiver in round 2 and add 2 defensive starters in round 1. Can't say that's not true, right? But we'll see. Going back to the Vikings for a minute, and in terms of them being a loser with that trade, I also think they kind of lost in the first round, because think about the fact they were at number 12. They could have drafted Kyle Hamilton there, a safety, which is a position they obviously targeted because they took Lewis Seen at the end of the first round. They not only gave the Lions Jamison Williams, but they gave away Kyle Hamilton in the process. And I don't know if you can recover from that. Seen is a good prospect, and I like him as a starting quality player in the NFL, but Kyle Hamilton is a defensive eraser. And, again, coming from the Chicago Bears land, it's great. But for the sake of the Vikings, who have been pushing these analytics and all this stuff all offseason, sometimes you just overthink football and you just miss out on a really good player because you want to recoup draft picks that maybe you've allotted certain value to, and they let Kyle Hamilton walk right out the door.
Yeah, I think the talk does get to them later on, like this late into the game when they're making their picks. But it does make me curious that the Rams, who made a lot of trades for draft picks, they just got in guys that other teams developed win a Super Bowl. And then teams like the Jets, the Lions, they get a lot of picks and they're recruiting in a class that isn't super strong, maybe in certain areas like at receiver. But who do you think could win here? The teams that get rid of a lot of picks to go and get experienced guys, or the guys who are winning the draft right now, but hey, they're not really proven yet?
Well, I think the Rams have proven their model works, where if you trade draft capital for established high-level veterans, you can compete for and win the Super Bowl. So, the NFL is a copycat league. We haven't seen a lot of first-rounders change hands for veterans aside from, well, actually, I should take that back. We saw A.J. Brown and Marquise Brown. It happened yesterday with 2 trades, which is pretty unique. And when we talk about the 49ers and Debo, who knows? Maybe they're waiting to see if they can land like that Treylon Burks replaces A.J. Brown type scenario. Maybe they get, somebody falls into their lap at 61, and now it makes them a little more willing to move on from Debo if they have a player who they're confident and can fill in. So I think there's a lot of chips left to fall with what you're talking about in terms of parlaying picks for players or picks for more picks. This is when it gets really interesting because, as Eric can attest, championship rosters are built on day 2 and day 3. The first round is where all the headlines come from, but championship teams are built on day 2 and day 3. So seeing how teams move up and down the board, how they value these picks, the way they kind of change. Right now, a team could come in, like the Bears, for example, enter this draft now at 5 picks. They could very well end the draft with 8 or 9 because they moved up and down the board. And maybe those last 3 guys that they were able to grab in the 6th and 7th round become key players on special teams, key rotational players on defense, even a starter or 2. This is where these guys really make their money.
Eric, before you get into yours, maybe you can come in here with the Debo situation. What if the Packers did not draft receivers because I know that they would never want to give the Packers Debo, but do you think that's a possibility? Why they maybe didn't pass on receivers in the first round?
I think there would have to be some good trade-off for them that they could see down the line, maybe in the next year where, okay, let's trade Debo and maybe we take the rest of the Packers draft this year, but we're going to need a first next year. And that first is going to be really late. So I don't see them doing business. And there's kind of some weird bad blood between LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan where guys they've coached together for years. They were buddies. And if you would have seen the handshake after the week 3 game between those 2 guys who wouldn't even look each other in the eyes because it's not tampering with Aaron Rodgers, but the 49ers just calling hey, what's up with Aaron Rodgers on draft day last year? It was really weird. I wonder if they've kind of repaired that relationship. And would that kind of prevent them from further doing business with trades? I don't know. That was something interesting.
Well, hey, if Rodgers doesn't get a receiver, he can just take claim of the Bucks right now and just say, I still own Chicago because they just beat out the Bulls in the NBA playoffs. But before we close this out, if you guys can give me just one or 2 players that everybody should be on the lookout for the remainder of the draft, like your hidden gems. Any sneaky picks?
Roger McCreary, cornerback out of Auburn. Love his game. Think he's being knocked because he didn't run as fast at the combine. I believe he ran a 4.55. At his pro day, ended up running better than that. I believe it was 4.47. But he's a slightly built guy at short, just shy of 6 feet tall, but 186 pounds. But his arms, he has 28 inch arm length, like little baby T-Rex arms, and teams aren't going to really like that. So that's a guy to really watch for their big time ability. I mean, he was a man-to-man guy at Auburn and played it very, very well. They asked him to shadow guys, cover guys inside, outside. At the Senior Bowl, they asked him to play a little bit of nickel to see that versatility. But I think that's one of my favorite prospects still remaining on the board. I'm curious to see where he goes.
That's a good point though, too, because the combine agents and scouts, they always tell me what you put on film is far more superior than the combine numbers, because I always equate it to, you can study all day long, but can you apply it? So it's like, if you're like a med student, you can study, pass a test, but can you go and apply that in surgery? It's kind of like, okay, if you have a bad combine, did you put up enough on tape to get a good draft pick? So I think that's a really good point about like maybe the combine being the fluke there, but I do think some scouts and agents will acknowledge what he has done and see what he did in the SEC. But Bryan, what do you think? Who are your sleeper picks?
Well, first, I got to say, that's a first-round analogy you just used, comparing the combine and being able to apply the athleticism on the field to like a med student passing a test and performing surgery. I'm going to use that at some point, but I'll give you credit for it.
I tweeted it out a couple during 2020 when players were considering playing or not playing. Everyone was telling me that they got to play, skip the combine, because if they were to forfeit a season and go and prepare to have a really good combine, I know scouts, agents, teams, they care far more about what you actually do and apply on the field.
100%. And sometimes it's hard to articulate that. So using an analogy like that is great. My guy would be Perry Winfrey. I think you're looking at a guy who, once he gets picked, he's going to work his way into a starting lineup. And we'll be looking back at this draft 2, maybe 3 years from now and saying the classic hindsight is 2020. But when Perry Winfrey is challenging for Pro Bowl bids and is widely regarded as a legit game wrecker on defense, fans are going to wonder, how the heck did this guy slip into the second round? And maybe that's just recency bias for me, because I can't get how, his level of dominance at the Senior Bowl out of my mind. But when you talk, Steph, about like applying football skills in terms of just seeing man versus man, one guy is just physically more dominant and more athletic than the guy across from him. Perry Winfrey checks that box, and I think he's going to be a really good pro and an instant starter to come out of round 2.
Yeah, just one more point to that is I don't hear too much talk about it because they can see talent when they see it. But I do think that the conference you come from can also play a role, because even the SEC, the Big Ten, it's a big jump to go to the NFL. And so if you're playing, maybe a non-power 5 or maybe a weaker conference or a weaker schedule, going up against the opposing teams, you have to consider that as well, just inserting them into a new team. That's something I don't think it's talked about as much, but I think where you play has a lot to do with it. That's why Texas and Oklahoma wanted to go to the SEC, and you can recruit better there too. So that's something I'm always curious about, is if they consider conferences. I don't hear it too much, but I have to take it into consideration if they're looking at tape and film as much as they say they are. So that's something I always think about. Well, Eric, what do you have to say about that? You're laughing about that. What do you think?
Oh yeah, no, I think some of the first round is a lot of flash and names and appeasing fans, and I think the meat and potatoes of building your team starts in the second and third round.
Yeah, well, we'll find out all of that tonight. I'm so grateful that you guys joined us to break this down. There's so many things to get to in the following rounds of the NFL draft, and hopefully everyone's teams get the picks they need, especially the Bears, and getting him a receiver, beat out the Packers for that. And hey, hopefully Debo stays in San Francisco for Eric out there with the 49ers. Thanks again so much, you guys, for following me. You can catch Eric on the Locked On 49ers and Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Bryan, you can catch him on the Draft Network. Where else can we catch you guys?
You follow me on Twitter at Eric_Crocker. And from there, you see all the content I'm putting out. I tweet it all out and all that good stuff. So follow me over there at Eric_Crocker.
Same here over on Twitter. I'm active over there. My Bears takes, draft takes at Bryan Perez NFL, Bryan with a Y. And love the Bears banter over there. So it's a good time.
There's always lots of banter in Chicago.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much for joining me, and best of luck with your picks for your teams in the NFL draft later on today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that does it for Daily Insider today. Kevin will be back on Monday. We have we have NBA playoffs, and we have the draft following up, plus more baseball, hockey playoffs as well. Make sure you come back here right on Vegas Insider. Find all of your odds there. Expert picks. Catch us later. That does it for Insider this week. I will see you next time.